Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this. Is my microphone on? Okay, we are on. The needle wasn't moving over there. Welcome to this August 3rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Friends, tonight in the news, Israel's big time in the news. I got a couple cartoons from some social media. In fact, these are from Facebook, and any of you who want these cartoons, let me bring this one full force here. Keep this in mind as we go through the news tonight, that Hamas is well known for using babies, children, women, civilians as human shields. And many of these civilians are willing to strap a bomb to themselves and become a suicide victim and blow themselves up in the presence of Israelis, Jewish people. And they are militants in that sense. So a lot of people who are called civilians are not really civilians. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through the news tonight. That's very important because there is so much bias happening against Israel right now that you need to keep what kind of enemy Israel is dealing with, fighting with, in mind. You know, and I'm going to comment when we get to the stories at the end of the program tonight, video from Israel, about an interview I played yesterday on a different channel for those in my church, of an interview that, a meeting that Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong had in Jerusalem with the Speaker of the Knesset in 1983 when Mr. Armstrong was presented a medal of honor from the Knesset, and the man he was speaking with, Mr. Menachem Salvador, referred to the Arabs as their cousins, and you know they are, and we'll talk about that later on in the program. Another cartoon from social media. I also have this one on my timeline. Any of you who want to share this cartoon anywhere, you can find it on my timeline on Facebook. This one, anytime John Kerry gets involved, it gets next to being ridiculous. Also, the leader of the boss of the human rights in the UN, she's gotten extremely ridiculous lately, saying it's not fair unless Israel shares its Iron Dome technology with Hamas. Excuse me, you're dealing with an enemy that, as the cartoon says here, the man from Hamas is got his demands on this piece of paper, and if they're really honest, as in their charter, it's like it says here, they want to annihilate all Jews, death to all Jews. And here's Kerry saying to the Prime Minister of Israel, could you at least meet him halfway? I mean, you know, the logic, the sense in trying to deal with someone who wants to annihilate you is just really, it's unsensical. Friends, I would have started with this next story. Let's cycle back through this next cartoon here again. Whoever did this one, I gave him thumbs up, high kudos on Facebook, because a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words. And this one just really speaks volumes. And I hope a lot of you that use Facebook might find this picture on my timeline and post it yourself. Share it around big time, because with the bias that's happening against Israel in the news right now, you'll see that when we get to the stories on Israel. I'm saving them until we're going to go out with the best tonight. I'm going to save those for the punch at the end. I would have opened with this next story because of it being an earthquake. And, you know, disease epidemics and seismic activity relate to the fourth seal of Revelation 6. The primary thing of this fourth seal is the loimos, the disease epidemics, as Jesus Christ in plain language described this seal. But he also said between the third seal and the fifth seal, there would be seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. And there's been a huge commotion on the ground in China today. First of all, I've got two videos for you. In this first one, the China state media released this footage from their cable television system showing the moment of the quake.
当中我们可以看到，现在看到就是这个监控的画面，画面中可以看到另据，可以看到现在现场的摇晃非常的厉害，很多的。
Now, while their broadcaster speaks in Chinese, I'm just going to tell you, friends, the China state broadcaster, closed circuit television, has released this footage showing the exact moment of today's earthquake when it struck. It's reported at least 150 people have been killed and scores more injured after a magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck in the southwest of the county at 16:30 local time, 4:30 in the afternoon in China. And then I've got more video footage related to that earthquake and this report from the BBC. At least, now the number from the time the China people broadcaster released that at more than 150, its number's now gone up. At least 367 people have been killed and some 1,300 injured. 1,300 injured after the magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck. Again, it was in southwest China, according to state media. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake struck about 11 kilometers, that'd be 7 miles roughly, northwest of Wenping in Yunnan province. Again, at 16:30 local time, 4:30 in the afternoon local time in China. A major rescue and relief operation is underway to help people trapped under rubble. John Sudworth has this report in the video.
Footage from surveillance cameras shows the moment the quake struck at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon when many people would have been at home. Those that could rushed to the safety of the outdoors. Later pictures from Chinese state media showed a major rescue operation getting underway. Yunnan province is in one of China's most earthquake-prone regions, and the army and the civil authorities are well prepared for this kind of disaster. Some rescue workers will have had experience in previous earthquakes, although the challenges can be numerous. The epicenter of this quake was in Yunnan's Ludian county, remote and mountainous but nonetheless home to more than 250,000 people. Communications are reported to be seriously affected and some roads have been blocked by landslides. It may be some time, possibly days, before the authorities are able to properly assess the scale of the death and destruction. Meanwhile, as well as the rescue work, a large-scale relief operation has begun, with thousands of tents and beds being sent to the affected areas. John Sudworth, BBC News, Shanghai.
Friends, another item related to the fourth seal. Let's put this chart up on the screen again just for a moment. Again, the fourth seal, Jesus Christ described in plain language as loimus, disease epidemics, seismus, commotions in the seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. That first story from China related to an earthquake, commotions on the ground. This next story is related to the loimus, to the disease epidemics. And you've been hearing about the Ebola virus. It's now claimed almost 700 lives in West Africa, amid warnings it's spreading faster than efforts to control it. Health officials have said early diagnosis and treatment is key to survival. And health officials are traveling to infected areas to teach people how to spot the symptoms of the deadly disease. Tulip Mazunder reports from the affected village of Guinea to meet those fighting an invisible killer.
The latest and one of the youngest victims of Ebola. Wrapped in layers of plastic bags, is the tiny body of 4-month-old Faya. His family are too scared to attend his burial, so he's carefully laid to rest by strangers. An anonymous grave in the middle of the forest. As one victim is buried, another suspected case is driven into the nearby treatment centre. The virus spreads through contact with a patient's body fluids, so health workers seal themselves in suits where temperatures hit 40 degrees Celsius. It's relentless and harrowing work. Adel looked after baby Faya in his final moments.
I was there with him just before he died. I had been feeding him milk. I stepped away just for a short break, but then I was called back and he was dead. I was totally devastated. At times, I just go outside and cry.
In remote villages devastated by Ebola, the fear is palpable. And that fear is helping spread the virus. Some people believe medics are actually bringing Ebola here and harvesting organs from the dead. But after yet another death, community leaders here agree to hear the truth about Ebola and, crucially, how to stop it spreading.
A few days ago, health workers couldn't even get into this village, but they have made a breakthrough here today. People are bringing out their sick relatives and they're agreeing to be checked over for symptoms of Ebola.
This man convinced his sick mother to get help. She had a high fever and had been vomiting for days. There have been 7 deaths in this small village so far, but medics say many more could be infected. Samples from affected villages come to this makeshift diagnostics laboratory. British scientists are among those testing for the virus.
When you see a negative case come from a patient who was previously positive, then it's a bit of a celebration because you know that person has been treated and he's feeling a lot better and he might even be released soon. So that is excellent. And then sometimes you're also seeing patients who are brought in, they're very young, and they are testing positive, and it's very sad. Yeah.
It's visiting time back at the treatment centre, and 13-year-old Alphonse, himself an Ebola survivor after getting treatment early, has come to see his little sister. It's good news. Initial tests for Marion have come back negative. But Ebola is a cruel and indiscriminate virus. Their mother is very sick and may not survive. As this crisis rages on, there are likely to be many more stories like hers. Infected, isolated, and fighting an invisible killer. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News, Gekadu.
Friends, yesterday I showed video. In fact, I did a couple of hours, well, except for taking time out for Mr. Armstrong to speak. For the 2 hours of a service yesterday on a live video stream, I spent all of the time Mr. Armstrong wasn't speaking just showing news videos, and I showed one that showed the doctor in Liberia who contracted Ebola, who was flown to the United States to a hospital just next door to me over in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was all dressed in white with air-breathing materials to keep any infection from spreading from him to someone else. But we'll keep an eye on this in the news. I'm sure there's going to be more of it ahead. For our next story, today, exactly 100 years from today, August 3rd, marks a very special occasion. And French and German leaders are marking the anniversary of World War I and something that happened on August 3rd in this next video. Let me just put this slide on the screen for a quick moment, bring it forward. We covered a couple of stories at the beginning tonight related to the fourth seal, the pale horse, whose rider is named Death, whose activities, alongside that horse, by the way, rides, as the Revelation points out, rides Hades, hell, the grave. And again, Jesus Christ described the activities of that horse in three terms. I gave you two of them: loimos, the disease epidemics, pestilence, and plagues part of it. And secondly, the seismos, seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, gale force winds of all kinds, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, etc. Any commotion on the ground or in the air. Christ also said terak, meaning trouble, troubled waters, either literally or figuratively, mobs, seditions, that kind of thing. We're going to move now, though, to the second seal that Jesus Christ described in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, as war and rumors of war. And then he said it would escalate or expand into world war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And that part of it didn't happen for some nearly 1900 years after Christ spoke that to his disciples, because it was not until 1914 that we had the first round of World War. And that first round that was kicked off with the killing of an archduke on this day, August 3rd, 1914, exactly 100 years ago today on the Roman calendar, Germany declared war against France. In this video, we'll be seeing the French and German presidents. We'll see how they both have been commemorating Germany's declaration of war on France on August 3rd, 1914, exactly 100 years ago today. François Hollande and his German counterpart Joachim Gauck made a joint tribute in Alsace to soldiers killed during World War I. They were to lay the first stone for a memorial at Ville-Armand Cemetery. Mr. Hollande lamented the hellish exercise which unfolded 100 years ago.
Il y a 100 ans, précisément 100 ans.
Exactly 100 years ago, France and Germany engaged with each other in a conflict which involved 72 countries and propelled 65 million men into carnage. It all happened very quickly after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on the 28th of June. A mechanized madness was set in train at that moment and a hellish exercise begun.
À Sarajevo, de l'archiduc François Ferdinand.
Okay. Friends, Israel, the Israeli military, says a soldier reported missing in Gaza on Friday is dead. Hadar Goldin was believed to have been captured by militants during fighting, leading to the collapse of a ceasefire shortly after it had been declared. The Israeli Defense Forces said it had determined that Lieutenant Goldin, previously considered captured, had died. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the operation in Gaza will continue according to Israel's security needs. John Brain reports.
For many Israelis, Hadar Goldin had become the public face of their nation's struggle against Hamas. The young soldier believed to have been captured by their mortal enemy. But in the past few hours, it's emerged that the 23-year-old had been killed in action. Hundreds of well-wishers gathered outside his family home to express their grief. The apparent kidnapping of Second Lieutenant Goldin had raised the stakes in the conflict. However, the revised version of events appears unlikely to prevent further bloodshed. Day 26 of Israel's military operation saw another 200 Palestinians and 2 more Israelis die. Gaza's hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of dead and wounded.
We are short of doctors, we are short of instruments, we are short of machines, we are short of everything.
Palestinians claim they're victims of collective punishment, but the Israeli Prime Minister has warned Hamas that it will pay an intolerable price if it continues its attacks.
Hamas again mistakenly believes that the people of Israel do not have the will and determination to fight them. And Hamas again will learn the hard way that Israel will do whatever it must do to protect its people.
The recent ill-fated ceasefire between the two sides already seems a long time ago. John Brain, BBC News.
Further on the Gaza crisis, friends, in this next video report from the BBC, Israel says no shells fell inside the UN school.
We've started an investigation, and the preliminary results are that there was no fire into the school, no shells fell inside the school, that there was fighting in the vicinity of the school.
Therefore,
now, let's be clear here. The former head of the UN schools in Gaza, the head of UNRWA, John Ging, has said, and he's a UN official, he's said that Hamas and the other terrorists have a repeated pattern of behavior of firing at Israel, firing their rockets and so forth from the immediate vicinity of UN schools and other UN facilities. And if it's the terrorists who are turning the vicinity of UN schools into war zones, ultimately they are accountable for turning those areas into combat zones, and they should be held responsible.
Well, leaving aside what Hamas is doing, Israel also needs, obviously, to be accountable for its actions, and a BBC team is reporting that an explosion went off 10 metres from this school.
Once again, if Hamas was shooting at Israel, firing its rockets or something of that sort in the vicinity of the school, they have violated UN neutrality, they have brutalized a UN institution, they have deliberately used a UN facility as a human shield. You know, there have been documented cases, not that the Israeli government says so, but the UN itself has said there have been 3 cases where UN schools have been used to store weapons, rockets for Hamas and the other terrorist groups. The United Nations Secretary General himself has called for an investigation. He says this is not satisfactory, that UN facilities have been brutalized this way by Hamas and the other terrorist groups in Gaza. And as I said a moment ago, John Ging, the former head of UNRWA, himself publicly said this was a repeated pattern of behavior by Hamas and the terrorists.
Okay, Mark Regev handled himself very well amid, BBC often does a very fine job on reporting objectively on both sides of things. I have to comment, though, that I do feel this particular interview, even both the interviewer and the editorializing in the video itself, showing people screaming, while Mr. Regev is speaking, and the reporter repeating a question as if she didn't just hear the answer he gave. Mr. Regev sat there and said no shells fell inside the facility, but that there was some fighting in the vicinity. He accused Hamas of using the school as a human shield. The attack hit the entrance of the facility in Rafah, where thousands of Palestinians are said to be sheltering. Now, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has gone a little bit moony himself here. He's described the attack as a moral outrage and a criminal act. All right, but let's go back to the cartoon I showed at the beginning of the program. Friends, keep this cartoon in mind as you hear biased reporting, not only in the news from news reporters themselves, but as they quote people who are supposed to be in responsible offices. But, you know, the United Nations is not a government. It's an organization of men. And just like the League of Nations before it, and then there was some kind of organization of men before that that attempted to create an organization that could bring about world peace. Well, the organization before the League of Nations failed. The League of Nations failed, and as a result, we had World War I, and then round two, World War II. And at the end of World War II, these things failed. Let's create the United Nations. And look at the war that's been raging for the past 3 years in Syria, and all the carnage that's been going on there. We've got a situation in the Middle East where Israel gave Gaza, that it was controlling, over to the Arabs, who let Hamas come in and take over, a terrorist organization, an organization called terrorist by the United Nations, by the United States, by the United Kingdom. I think even France chimed in on that one, labeling Hamas a terrorist organization. And yet here, everybody, now that Israel is able to defend itself well, pretty well, Israel's lost a number of soldiers, more than they usually use in a battle at this stage. And, you know, it's a shame to hear the bias going against Israel. I said to you earlier, especially consider, let me put this one up on the screen. Consider this cartoon where Hamas is showing on a piece of paper his demand of death to all Jews. And Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, sitting there saying to the Prime Minister of Israel, could you at least meet him halfway? I mean, when you've got somebody who wants to annihilate you, how do you meet them halfway? You voluntarily have half of your people commit suicide? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. When you got an enemy like that, of course, some of the enemy has acknowledged that God fights the battles for Israel, some of the battles for Israel. Some of their missiles, some of them said, it looks like their God turned the missile around and redirected it midair so it wouldn't hit anybody, even though their Iron Dome missed a few here and there. God intervened for them in those cases. The enemy said that. But did I cover everything I told you I would say to you? I'm in a hot studio, friends, and so sometimes it gets hard to think when the bright lights are on if I don't have a note right in front of me. If I missed something tonight I said I would cover, I'll do my best to cover it tomorrow night. But we're going to end the program here tonight, friends, and thank you for joining me on this Sunday evening. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.